So in the last lecture, we learned a lot about inflation. We completed inflation chapter in the last lecture, and let us quickly revise what did we learn in the last chapter, or what did we learn overall in inflation chapter. What is inflation? What is the definition of inflation? Think and tell. Inflation is the persistent rise in average prices of goods and services. है ना? These two words are very important. Persistent rise in average price. These two words are very important. Then we saw the different types of inflation: trotting, creeping, galloping, hyperinflation, monetary collapse, right? Specifically in the last lecture, we saw something very interesting. We saw different baskets of goods and services. We saw PPI, Producer Price Index, which is categorized into input PPI and output PPI. Then we saw WPI. Who gives WPI? Office of Economic Advisor, Ministry of Commerce and Industry. What is the base year for WPI? 2011-12, right? What are the main baskets in WTI? Food, fuel, manufactured products, and food products, right? These are the main. How many goods and services? Goods are there, 697. Are services there in WPI? No. Are indirect taxes calculated in WPI? No. Earlier they used to be, now they are not calculated. What is the committee which recommend the change in WPI? Dr. Soumitra Chaudhary Committee. Okay. Then we move from WPI we move to CPI, Consumer Price Index. How many types of CPIs are there? 6. CPI rural, CPI urban, CPI combined. These are given by whom? These are given by National Statistical Office, Ministry of National Statistical Office, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, MOSPI. See, when you are reading or when you are studying for UPSC, it is very important you know about the ministry name, and what work does it do. So there will be a lot of overlap between ministries also. So some work would be done by Ministry of Heavy Industries, some work would be done by Ministry of Commerce and Industry, some work would be done by Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Okay, so you need to know the clear bifurcation ki kiska kya hai. And very often in prelims this thing is asked ki this scheme is run by which ministry, or that is asked in prelims. So they will not give 4 ministries as option. They will give one statement ki this scheme is under this ministry, or WPI is given by this ministry. WPI does not include services, and WPI does not include indirect taxes. So which of the following are true? ऐसा वो लोग देंगे. They might give you in this manner. Then we went for CPI, NSO, National Statistical Office. What is the base year for the first 3 CPIs? It is 2011-12, right? Which CPI do we target in monetary policy inflation targeting? We target CPI, headline CPI combined inflation. Okay, headline CPI combined inflation. Do you remember this? Then which are the other 3 CPIs? CPI rural laborers, CPI agricultural laborers, and CPI industrial workers. What is the base year for CPI industrial workers? 2016. What is the base year for the other two? 86, 87, which will be brought to 1920 pretty soon, right? Then we also saw some differences between CPI and WPI. What are the differences? Can we think about any differences? First of all, indirect taxes are there in CPI but not there in WPI. Services are there in CPI but not there in WPI. Are all services there in CPI? No. All services are not there. There are some services which are still missing. We spoke about hotel is one of the industries. Insurance is one. Sorry, services. Insurance is one of the services which is not there in your WPI. Okay, what are the other differences? Electricity tariffs, industrial tariffs are considered for WPI, and consumer tariffs are considered for CPI. What are the other differences? Distribution costs vary from state to state. What are the other differences? There can be state taxes which vary from state to state, which are not counted in WPI, right? There can be different preferences, different tastes of consumers which vary from state to state, different levels of demand which would raise the prices in different states. That is not considered in WPI. And most importantly, the weightage of food products is more in CPI compared to WPI. Okay? Did we see any committee for services price index, SPI? We saw a committee called as Professor C.P. Chandrasekhar Committee, right? We also saw some other indices, food price index. Does NSO give any separate food price index? Yes, it does. It gives CPI food price index or CPI food index. Does OEA, MOCI gives a separate food price index at the wholesaler level? Yes, it also does. Does RBI give a housing index? Yes, RBI housing index it gives. NHB gives Residex, National Housing Bank gives Residex. And what else? What else do we know about indices? FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization, gives World Food Price Index. Okay. Then what else did we see in the last lecture? We saw Phillips curve. Okay, Phillips curve is nothing but an inverse relationship between your inflation and unemployment levels. Okay, not employment, unemployment levels. इनवर्स रिलेशनशिप है, एज इन्फ्लेशन राइजेस इन्फ्लेशन अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट फॉल्स डाउन because you employ more and more people, because there is growth in the economy, prices are rising, you employ more people. चलो, this is called as Phillips curve. Then we saw inflation में कौन loser है कौन winner है. We saw that always those who are lending money, those who are earning fixed income, earning at a fixed rate, are the losers. Creditor is the loser, who is letting out or who is giving the money on a fixed rate of interest. Remember in monetary policy chapter we did something called as fixed rate and floating rate. Do you remember? So here who is the loser? Fixed rate wala. So if banks tell you कि if you want a floating rate of interest, it will be tied to CPI, which means bank is not losing any money because interest will rise as CPI rises, as inflation rises. Do you understand this? Right? What is core inflation? Core inflation is nothing but excluding food, fuel and food products. Okay? What is headline inflation? Headline is everything combined. Okay? Why do we call it as a price index? Because we compare the price with a particular year. We call it as a price index, right? That particular year is called as a base year. So when we say 2010-11 is the base year, we say that 10-11 means 100. आज कितना cost है, and then we calculate the price increase accordingly. ठीक है? What do you mean by base effect? Have we heard about base effect? Have we done base effect? What do you mean by base effect? Unusually high or unusually low results due to some abnormality or some anomaly in the base year's value is called as a base effect. So you cannot take 2020-21 as a base year. Why? Because it was COVID year. You cannot take it as a base year for further 5-10 years. Yes or no? Because it is a COVID year. So if you compare laptop prices of 2025-26 with 2021, it is not a meaningful comparison because there was a lot of demand caused by lockdowns and COVID and all. समझ में आ रहा है? Are you understanding this? So you cannot take, so you have to take a base which is very normal, which is very relevant, which is covering all the goods and services in a normal scenario. Then only you can compare. Can you compare current prices 2008 prices? Why not? Because 2008 में recession हुआ था, तभी artificially high prices were there. So you cannot compare today's price with 8 prices. You can compare with 9's prices, 10's prices. समझ में आ रहा है? This is base effect. Then I told you that we will read a very interesting article. So we'll read that article on inflation first, and then we'll start with a very big chapter called as banking. See, big ये मैं बोल रहा हूँ, पता चला 2 lectures में ही हो गया. You know, there is a possibility of that also. We'll try to read this. ठीक है? You have to read. I will read it later on. You have to try to comprehend it. It's time for RBI to turn its attention to inflation. ठीक है? I'll just चलो शुरू हो जाओ. Start. Just start. This you will find a difficult paragraph to understand. Go on, read, try to read. Interesting article, lot many things to learn from it. everything that we have read. ऐसे ही होता है. You are able to read everything appearing in the newspapers. That is the very good thing about knowing the concepts. Once you know the concepts, it becomes very easy to understand. You to finish reading this, ठीक है? Majority समझा होगा, but there was one paragraph which was very difficult to understand, which was very difficult to comprehend. So let us see what are they trying to say here. Very quickly I'll go through this. कहाँ गया? Until April this year, only WPI was on the rise, led by fuel and commodity prices. We know industrial inputs are more in WPI. They are there in CPI also, but more in WPI. But in May, even retail CPI picked up at 6.3%. Notably, CPI inflation crossed the RBI's upper limit of 6%. We know 4 plus minus 2 after 5 months. And the run-up was not just year on year, which can be somewhat discounted due to data disruptions, but also month on month also it is increasing. So what happened and what does this change mean, or this increase mean? Rising inflation hurts lenders and benefits borrowers. We know this. To that extent, the government, one of the biggest borrowers, we know government is biggest borrowers, crowding out. Remember fiscal deficit, we are borrowing, stands to benefit. Why stands to benefit? Because when it will repay it to the banks, it will have to repay lesser purchasing power to the banks. As high inflation will lower the national debt load. Now, how will it lower the national debt load? What do you think? In relation to the size of the economy. What is the meaning of this? इसका meaning क्या है? What is the meaning of this? High inflation will lower the national debt load in relation to the size of the economy. What do you mean by size of the economy? क्या होता है? What is the size of the economy? GDP? Let's call this as nominal. ठीक है? National debt load मतलब क्या होता है? Public debt, government debt. When there is high inflation, what rises? This rises or this rises? Nominal GDP rises. When your base becomes big, percentage को क्या होगा? What will happen to the percentage? Would it reduce? So currently your debt to GDP, let's say 60%. This is 60, this is 100. Tomorrow this 100 due to inflation, nominal है nominal. Due to inflation, this goes to 120. कितना हो गया? 50%. Did your load reduce? This is what they mean by that. To that extent, the government, one of the biggest borrowers, stands to benefit as high inflation will lower the national debt load in relation to the size of the economy. Percentage in relation. Absolute debt load कम नहीं हो रहा है, but in relation to the size of the economy, it is reducing. The union budget assumed 14% growth in nominal GDP, which means your with inflation growth will be 14%. However, actual growth is set to exceed this and could be over 16% as per our estimates. Why do you think actual growth would exceed 14%? Because of inflation. Inflation is very high currently. That is why our nominal GDP will boost the economy. ठीक है? At least the calculations, at least on paper. Next. ये ना? We have recently lowered our real GDP forecast. Nominal increasing, real reducing. What is the meaning? Inflation is very high. Yes or no? We have reduced our real GDP growth forecast for 21-22 to 9.5% from 11%. But our nominal estimate has gone up, which means what? Inflation, very high. As we now expect WPI and CPI to average 7% and 5%. Is this in range of Monetary Policy Committee? It is in range. Why? Because Monetary Policy Committee looks at only CPI. It doesn't look at WPI. Remember, headline CPI combined, only this. It is 5.3%. It is within range. The surprise surge in inflation makes even these estimates appear conservative. So hence, you can reduce, on paper, you can reduce your debt to GDP ratio by inflation. समझा कैसे? Because you are increasing your base. You are increasing your, what we say, nominal GDP. ठीक है? The GDP deflator, which measures the difference between nominal and real GDP, is a weighted average of WPI and CPI. This is fine. So GDP deflator is all goods and services. Basket mein you make WPI, CPI. When you combine all of them, you will get GDP deflator with a higher weightage to the former. And given that nominal GDP is used as the base for computing fiscal ratios, remember fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, effective revenue and primary deficit, they are all part of percentage of GDP. We have done these calculations. Remember 222,87379 was the GDP. That was nominal GDP. Okay? As a base for computing fiscal ratios. All of this will get deflated. How will they get deflated? Because when your nominal GDP is rising, your ratio will come down because your fiscal deficit, your borrowing is the same, right? Ceteris paribus means amongst other things. Okay, it is Latin. So, like we saw with debt to GDP ratio, similarly all other ratios would also come down. But are they actually coming down or on paper? On paper, because your nominal GDP is rising. Why it is rising? Despite real GDP falling, nominal GDP is rising. Why? Because of inflation. Okay? The value of past debt and debt servicing cost, which means total debt and interest. Debt servicing cost is interest. Thus gets paid. Paid means reduced. Reduced in real terms as inflation rises, because inflation बढ़ रहा है, nominal GDP increasing, your ratios come down. Viewed from a debt dynamics perspective, as the gap between growth and interest rate rises. Now see this. Interest rate is dependent on debt or GDP? Debt. Growth is what? GDP. So they are saying as the gap between growth and interest rate rises, which means GDP is growing, but interest rate would remain same, yes or no? वो तो loan लेके रखा है, we have already contracted the loan. We also saw majority of the loan is fixed. Remember, we saw majority of the loan in economic survey, it was written majority of the loan is fixed interest loan, not even floating. तो ये constant है, this is constant, interest rates constant. Growth and interest rates ka gap is increasing, which means growth is rising, interest rate is constant, which means GDP is rising, debt is constant. What will happen? Your debt to GDP ratio will come down. Samjha? Simple. Debt to GDP ratio falls as the gap between growth and interest rate rises. So today your interest rate is 6% and your growth is, let's say, 7%. Tomorrow your growth is 12%, 14%, which means your GDP is rising very fast, but debt is the same. Debt plus interest is the same. So your debt to GDP ratio falls down. Next. Inflation reduces purchasing power and hits private consumption is well known. With incomes under stress, the impact on consumption can be magnified because you are spending more, but on unproductive things. On food, you are spending more rupees than what you actually spent. With incomes under stress, the impact is magnified. What is important to note is that in the present context is that inflation is likely to hit private consumption in rural areas more than in urban areas. So currently the inflation is such, it will hit rural areas more than in urban areas. Overall food CPI, remember I told you food CPI inflation was lower than non-food inflation. Okay? This is a continuation of the pattern observed in the 5 months where food inflation averaged 3.5 and non-food was 6%. In 2020, however, the situation was opposite because 2020 disrupted everything. It disrupted food supply chains and everything. So we have food inflation higher in that year. Lowering food inflation coupled with higher non-food inflation means reducing purchasing power for farmers. Why? Why? In food inflation, do they receive money or do they pay money? They receive money. Farmers are providers of food. So when you say food inflation is lower, which means they are getting less money, which means when you are buying onion is at a cheaper price. But who is getting that money? Farmer ultimately. So when food prices reduce, farmers do not benefit. They get less money. But they also have to buy clothes. They also have to buy education for their children and electricity and all. Non-food inflation is rising, which means they are receiving less money but paying more money. Agreed? Very advanced article. I told you this is 8 or 9 out of 10 in terms of analysis. Lower food inflation coupled with higher non-food inflation means reduced purchasing power for farmers. The terms of trade which were favorable for agriculture last year are now worsening because last year we saw trend was reverse. Food inflation was higher, non-food was lower, so farmers were gaining. This year it is ulta. Non-food is higher, food is lower, so farmers are losing now. Food inflation was, however, lower in rural areas vis-a-vis urban areas in May. Okay? So what agriculturists typically sell, food, is rising at a slower pace Then what they do not produce? Education, clothing, and have to buy from the market. Samjha? Last year a normal monsoon, why they have given the reasons also. Why last year food inflation was aisa, last year a normal monsoon, a bumper crop and a high food inflation in wholesale and retail markets added to rural incomes because they were very happy. Government support through ramped up Manrega and PM Kisan allocations and record food procurement also helped. So when government procures food from the farmers, farmers get assured prices. कि ये तो government ले जाएगा, they will give me money. ठीक है? If government is not procuring, farmers are not sure who will buy, who will not buy. We'll see in agri this thing, right? This year the monsoon is projected to be normal, but Manrega support is budgeted at a lower level and price trends are not supportive for rural population. So कहना क्या चाहते हो? What are they trying to say? कि farmers are in danger or farmers are in peril of losing money. ठीक है? Next. Inflation trend, specifically input prices reflected better by WPI. Do you agree with this? Input prices are reflected better by WPI. We saw input and intermediate goods are in WPI. See, remember WPI is producer plus wholesaler mixed. I told you. Matter for corporate performance as well. Why corporate performance? Because they are the producers. Big MNCs are also producing things. So when WPI happens, what happens is that they are getting more prices. In food inflation, farmer is getting more prices. In WPI, corporates are getting more prices. Yes or no? Because they are selling the manufactured goods, and if inflation is high, they are getting more money. While producers seem to be bearing a part of the burden of rising input cost. When we come to input cost, here I told you about output. Ki output they are receiving more. But what about input cost? Remember input PPI or input, here they are mixed, they are merged PPI and WPI. So if your inputs are rising, you have a burden on corporate performance. While producers seem to be bearing a part of the burden of rising input cost for now, these could get passed on in greater measure to consumers and once demand recovers. Do you agree? Why will they pay out of their pocket? They will pass on to the consumers. The RBI will have to closely monitor inflation trends and calibrate its policy response. It has not intervened on high inflation since the onset of the pandemic, and rightly so. RBI has not done anything for inflation since pandemic because remember growth versus inflation, always the debate. So RBI was pushing for growth. We saw in monetary policy also, the minutes also ki RBI is pushing for growth. Accommodative stance hai of the latest monetary policy. Why? Because they want growth. But the current spell of inflation is over a high base. What does this mean? Base here is high, base is very high, and a continuation of recent trends will persuade it to turn to focus back on inflation. So if the inflation increases further, it will pay more attention to inflation. It is pertinent to note that with the repo rate at 4%, the real rate adjusted for inflation, see I always tell you, these rates are always nominal, everything is nominal. Unless specifically mentioned real, always assume GDP estimates, GDP growth rate, repo rates are all nominal. Okay? They look at the headline rates, nominal rates. Adjusted for inflation has been negative for a year. So we have negative real interest rates, abhi tak. Okay? I told you, it happens sometimes. Japan follows it deliberately. We are not following it deliberately, but it is happening. Rising inflation reduces return on fixed income instruments. Do you agree with this? We saw bond holders, fixed income, pension holders, including bank deposits, which account for over 50% of households' financial savings. Okay? This has already induced a shift to riskier asset class. Didn't we read this? We read this. Such as equities. Equities mean shares, which has ramifications for overall financial stability. Do you agree with this? Yes. The elbow room to stay accommodative then narrows, which means RBI can no longer have an accommodative outlook because if inflation is rising further, RBI will have to change its outlook from accommodative to neutral and neutral to tight. Yes or no? So the space to remain accommodative, the space to say, yeah, fine, I am willing to cut rates, narrows down because rise in inflation. Given the need for monetary policy to stay accommodative, it might be time to consider other supply side interventions, supply side factors to reduce the supply side inflation, such as cut in excise rates. Excise rate tax on production. So if excise rates are cut, at producer level only prices would be reduced. Okay? On petroleum products to soften the inflation. Did you understand the entire article in depth? Samjha pura? So whatever we are doing makes sense. Whatever we are studying, aisa nahi hai ki we are studying only bookish. See, I'll be very honest with you. There are many other places where books are taught. Book mein kya likha hai, that is taught. But ultimately for us, we have to write very relevant, succinct and meaningful answers. We have to give very relevant, succinct and meaningful answers in the interview. For that, we need to be able to understand newspapers. And when you understand newspapers, your thinking improves. So you can anyways now remember that high inflation causes a lower debt to GDP ratio on paper. Why? Because high inflation causes nominal GDP to increase, which reduces the debt to GDP ratio, right? So that is what I always strive to achieve. That is what I always inculcate in my students. Ki you should know the concepts. Once you know the language, you will be easily comfortable with reading this. Were you comfortable, majorly comfortable in reading this? We have all done this, right? So when you see this lecture, whenever, be it August or I think September, you will see this lecture. Whenever you see this lecture, always be mindful of the article which you read and let me know via SMS or Telegram, or probably by that time I'll be on WhatsApp also. Let me know whether you find it helpful or whether you understood it. At least more than 50-60%, if you understand, then we are on the right track, because you have just started your preparation and still reading such advanced articles. Okay? So no need to be scared of economics. That is what my point is. Economics is nothing but a foreign language. Once you know the words, once you know the grammar, once you know the sentence structuring, you will come to know. The more and more you read articles like this, the more and more you write articles like this or write text like this. Okay? And this is what we have to replicate in the exam. If you write, if you read only books, you will have a very academic or textual language in your answers, which they don't want. They want current issues. They ask questions on current issues. They want current answers, right? So that is why newspaper is the most important source apart from economic survey and budget. Okay? But did you understand the article overall? Very good. Can we move ahead? Can we start with the next chapter? So let us start with a very, very nice chapter, which we call it as banking. Banking. Okay. See, bank, I don't need to explain what is a bank. Bank is a financial institution which deals in money. How do you think banks make money? Bank makes money. How do you think banks survive? How do you think banks earn profits? What do you think? On loans, it gets interest. On deposits, it gives interest. What is the difference is the profit of the bank. Do you agree with this? Simple hai. It gives other services also, locker services, foreign exchange services, but they are all small. Main business kya hai? What is the dhanda of banks? What is the product which banks sell? What do you think is the product which bank sells? Money. Bank sells money. What is the price it charges? Interest. Bank also buys money in terms of deposit. Yes or no? When you deposit in the bank, you keep money with the bank, and on that it pays your price. What is that called? Interest. Difference in these two prices, interest received and interest given, is the profit made by the bank. Do you agree with this? Very simple. Okay? Now answer me this, very important. So we are now talking about commercial banks. Central bank ho gaya, monetary policy done. We have now come below the second level. Remember, I told you in the monetary policy chapter that we are thinking from a RBI angle, from a central bank angle, from an angle of monetary policy authority. Now we are thinking from an angle of commercial banks. Yes or no? Okay? So now, answer. Commercial banks create credit. True or false? Commercial banks create credit. True or false? Remember, central banks control credit. Commercial banks create credit. Okay? Now, I will show you how they create credit. Okay? They create credit. Sir, how they create credit? What do you mean by credit? Is it money? No. Credit is the amount of loans which are given in the economy. Credit is the amount of udhari which is going on. It is not hard cash. It is not money actually. It is the amount of udhari. Okay? See this. Very interesting. Mr. A, right? He deposits 100 rupees in his bank. His bank is HDFC. Do you think HDFC can lend out entire 100 rupees, or it has to keep something aside? What it has to keep something aside? Do we know the name? it has to keep CRR aside, it has to keep SLR aside, yes or no? In this chapter we are going to read more things which it has to keep aside. Okay? Let's say 10% is the reserve, total reserve. How much is the loanable fund of HDFC? 90 rupees. Loanable. HDFC gives loan of 90 rupees after keeping 10 rupees side में. 90 आया to Mr. B. Why Mr. B is taking a loan? Why do you think Mr. B is taking a loan? He wants to buy something. He wants to repay someone. उसने किसी और से उधारी लिया होगा. For that person, he is taking a new loan and repaying the old loan. Anything. Do you agree that Mr. B will not keep the money with himself, but he will give it to someone? If he buys a house, he gives it to the builder. If he buys a car, he gives it to the car seller. If he, what all loan is there for business, he will give it to businessmen or those who are trading with him, those who are dealing with him. So let's say he gives this 90 rupees to Mr. C. Mr. C क्या करेगा? What would Mr. C do of this 90 rupees? How much is given? 90. What would Mr. C do of that 90? Either he will pay Mr. D, he will give it to someone else, or he will keep in his bank account. ठीक है? So let's say Mr. C का कुछ business, he had to pay 90 rupees to Mr. C due to some business. He paid back 90 rupees. Now he has to repay HDFC 90 rupees. ठीक है? Mr. C goes to his bank. Now his bank is called as ICICI Bank. ठीक है? How much did ICICI Bank receive? 90 rupees. How much would ICICI Bank keep aside, or will it give 90 rupees as loans, or will it keep aside something for reserve? It will keep aside. How much? 10% बोला था हमने. So 9 rupees it will keep aside, yes or no? So let's say it keeps 9 rupees as reserve. How much is the loanable fund of ICICI? 81 rupees. ICICI gives, what it will do? It will give loan. It will give loan to whom? Mr. D. Kitna? 81 rupees. What would Mr. D do? He can either repay Mr. E or he will keep with his bank. Let's say he keeps it in his bank. He gives it to someone else and he keeps it in his bank. So let's say he keeps it in his bank called as Axis Bank. How much is Axis Bank receiving? 81 rupees. How much would it keep aside? Let's say 8 rupees it keeps aside. ठीक है? How much will it be able to lend? 73 rupees. ठीक है? 8 rupees side में रखा, 81 मिला. Axis Bank is giving how many? 73 rupees to Mr. E. ठीक है? Now this 73 rupees, Mr. E repays or gives or does business or buys a car from Mr. F. Now what would Mr. F do? He would keep in SBI. How much would SBI receive? 73. How much would SBI keep as reserves? 7 rupees. Are you agreeing with this? ठीक है? And 66 rupees would be given as loan. Do you agree with this? Where did we start with? How much did we start with? How much is the credit in the economy now? 90. First credit. Second credit? 81. Third credit? 73. Fourth credit? 66. So if I ask you to calculate how much is the credit in the economy, how much is the udhari, how much is the circulation, see all is happening simultaneously, yes or no? Nobody has repaid anything, nobody has taken money away from the economy. How much is the total money? 90 plus 81 plus 73 plus 66. समझा? जितना भी टोटल होगा इसका, whatever, how much is the total? 639 plus 110. ठीक है? 9, 10, 18, 18 and 18 and 6, 24, 24 and 7, 31. 310. How much did you start with? 100. How much did you create credit out of 100 rupees? Banks create credit. समझा? How banks create credit? Money supply is only 100 rupees. मतलब currency 100 से ही चालू हुआ था and it went on. How much is the credit? This is the credit we are talking about. Do you realize what we are talking about? Do you agree what we are doing here? This is the credit. It creates credit. Very important part. It creates credit. Okay? Now, how will RBI control this credit? If it wants to reduce this 310, what it will do? It will increase this. When this increases, this also increases. When this increases, this reduces. When this reduces, everything reduces. This is how RBI controls credit. RBI does not create credit. RBI controls credit. ऊपर नीचे. ठीक है? RBI also controls the direction of credit. If RBI says you cannot lend to Mr. B, lend to Mr. X, who is a farmer. This 90 will go to Mr. X, who is a farmer. How? Priority sector lending, sir. How? Margin requirement, sir. ठीक है? How? धमकी, sir. Moral suasion. ठीक है? All of that coming together now. So this is how commercial banks create credit. Easy to follow. Now let us look at the structure or the banking structure in India. There are so many banks. You must have heard so many names. So we are looking at the banking structure in India now. Okay? So first type are called as commercial banks. What are they called as? Commercial banks. See, as the name suggests, they are commercial in nature. They have profit as their own motive. They have profit as their business. Okay? Second type are called as cooperative banks. Oh sir, cooperative banks. What are they called as? Cooperative banks. Okay, we'll speak about them. Third type are called as land development banks. Sir, ये तो सुना ही नहीं है. कहाँ से नया नया लेके आते हो? Fourth type are called as investment or merchant banks. ठीक है? Fifth type are called as refinance institutions. Sixth type, I would write it here. Are non-banks. They are not banks. ठीक है? So many types of banks we have in India. Samjha? We'll take one by one and we'll go through the types. What are commercial banks? Their main motive is profit making. Okay, very simple. The main motive is profit making. Now these commercial banks can be either domestic, which means Indian, can be either foreign. Do you agree? We'll see examples for all of them. They can be public, they can be private. कोई और है? They can be differentiated banks. Sir, what is this now? New thing. We'll come to it. Or they can be regional rural banks. So many types of commercial banks we have. Can you tell me any example of commercial bank? All the banks that we know of mostly are commercial banks. They work for profit motive. So one example of domestic commercial bank, which means Indian commercial bank, can you give it? Be it public or private. You can call it SBI, State Bank of India. You can call Central Bank of India, CBI. Not RBI, but Central Bank of India is also a bank. You can say Axis Bank, you can say HDFC. These are domestic. What about foreign? Do we have any foreign banks in India? Do you know? Have you heard Standard Chartered Bank? Okay. Have you heard HSBC? Not HDFC. HDFC is Indian bank. HDFC is completely Indian. Atmanirbhar Bharat. Okay. HSBC. Have you heard HSBC? You might have heard. I am not sure of Bank of America. It also had some operations here. Arey, very important foreign bank. Have you heard Citibank? CITI. Have you heard Citibank? C Scam 1992 series. You will come to know. Citibank. Citibank cartel. They are all foreign banks. They are operating in India. हमारे ही मतलब हमारे पास ही है, but they are foreign banks. ठीक है? What about public banks? What is the difference between public banks now? See, examples this you can write when you feel like. I will not write the names of the banks. What is the example of what is a public bank? What is a public commercial bank? What do you think is a public commercial bank? See, all these are working for profit. Always remember, all these are working for profit. They are here in the banking business. They are doing business. ठीक है? Public में क्या है? Public में government ownership is 51% or more. Any example? State Bank of India. Any other example? सब SBI बोलते हैं. Any other example? Have you heard of Punjab National Bank? Any other example? Have you heard of Bank of Baroda? BOB? Public banks. Private banks, all others. So can I say there can be domestic public banks also, there can be domestic private banks also. SBI is a domestic public bank. HDFC is a domestic private bank. ठीक है? Private banks are what? ICICI, Axis Bank, HDFC. Coincidentally, ICICI and Axis were earlier public banks, which were then privatized, right? So these are all private banks. Do you agree with this? Very simple to follow. Now, what are differentiated banks? You might have heard these things. We'll speak in detail about these things. You might have heard something called as Payments Bank. Have you heard Payments Bank? Have you heard Payments Bank? Paytm Payments Bank, Airtel Payments Bank. ठीक है? India Post Payments Bank. So many payments bank are there. Second is small finance banks. Small finance banks. You might not have heard of small finance banks. AU Small Finance Bank or Jana Small Finance Bank. These are all small finance banks. They are fairly new in existence. They have started operating since 2016. Before that, they were not there. ठीक है? We'll speak about them in detail, but just अभी के लिए for the purposes of this chart, this much is enough. What are regional rural banks? See, as the name suggests, regional rural banks are rural in nature, regional service है, but थोड़ा बहुत profit वो भी कमा लेते हैं. Is it okay? Is it understood? Do you remember what is LAF? Liquidity Adjustment Facility. Regional rural banks are not allowed to access LAF because RBI says तुमको क्यों पैसा चाहिए? You are in rural area, function within their own ambit only. No need to know all this, but I am just giving an correlation. What do you think are cooperative banks? क्या लगता है? What do you think are cooperative banks? They also work for profit motive. ऐसा नहीं है कि they don't need profits, but profit is their secondary motive. They work for cooperative, mutually helping one another. So let's say you are 10-15 people, I am one. We all open a cooperative bank, which means कि we float a bank, we accept deposits from the public, we give loans to the people who need it, but the only difference is that we are not profit hungry. We are doing it out of the love of our hearts कि हमारा cost cover हो जाए, and if one of our cooperative members needs money, then money needs to be made available to that person. बस simple, that's it. समझा आपको? समझा what do you mean by cooperative banks and commercial banks? Did you get it? Do you understand it? It is very simple. Cooperative banks, they are cooperative in nature. Do we know any name of any cooperative bank? सुना होगा आपने? Have you heard of PMC Bank? Punjab Maharashtra Cooperative Bank. Scam riddled bank. सबसे ज़्यादा scam चल रहा है अभी. Read newspapers. That is why I tell you, read newspapers every single day. You would have heard about PMC by now, right? So cooperative banks. Now cooperative banks, very important, cooperative banks can be urban cooperative banks, they can be rural cooperative banks. ठीक है? ठीक है? They can be urban cooperative banks, they can be rural cooperative banks. Always keep in mind that they are cooperative banks. They are meant for a cooperative nature. Do they earn profits? Yes, they do, but it is not their main motive, right? Now, this rural cooperative banks are divided into, they have a 3-tier structure. So simple है. सबसे ऊपर कौन आता है? State. Who comes after state? State के नीचे का यूनिट क्या होता है? District. ठीक है, एंड डिस्ट्रिक्ट के नीचे आता है पैक्स, PAC. I will tell all of this. We'll do one by one, slowly. So state cooperative bank, district cooperative bank और district central cooperative bank जो भी बोलते हैं उसको, and primary agricultural credit society. You might have heard of Shamrao Vitthal Cooperative Bank, SVC. So these are all cooperative banks. ठीक है, ad आता था पहले on Marathi channels. So from those who are Maharashtrians, you might be knowing. Primary agricultural credit society, district cooperative banks and state cooperative banks. ठीक है, this operate at the state level, these operate at the district level, and these operate at individual rural or local level. ठीक है, these are all rural का. urban में also you can say there is such a thing, but not that rigidly defined, not that accurately defined. That is why I am saying कि urban में मत लिखो उसको. ठीक है, now we'll see एक एक का purpose. Urban cooperative bank, very good sir, we know they are cooperative in nature, we know they are for helping people, we know they are not for profit purposes, we know they are only in urban areas, we know ki they operate in urban areas. Same goes for rural, same goes for state. I hope you understand. Now what is PACs? We come to. They are cooperative banks specifically for pooling in money to give it to agricultural like farmers or agricultural laborers. Why do they need money? For implements, tools and machinery for their implements. ठीक है? So primary agricultural credit society. Agricultural credit means credit to agriculture sector. So these work at the lowest level, these work at the ground level, these work at the ekdam grassroots level with the farmers to help them with the money. Did you understand this? Primary agricultural cooperative society. PACs. Credit society, sorry. समझा? Let me erase this. I'll erase it later. चलो. 5th point we will rename it. ठीक है? Any doubt अभी तक? So can there be a public? Can there be a foreign private bank? Yes. Foreign private bank हो सकता है. See, when the foreign bank becomes public bank, it becomes a domestic bank only because हमारा ही है. There can be a foreign private bank. Foreign public नहीं हो सकता है because वो foreign भी है और वो public भी है. Government control but foreign bank. If we operate a bank outside India, then it becomes a public foreign bank. Do you realize? If we operate a bank outside India, वो बाहर का है. ONGC Videsh is a company which operates outside India. It is an Indian company which operates completely outside India. ठीक है? Then we come to land development banks. Sir, what are land development banks? सर क्या लिखते जा रहे हो आप सर? What are land development banks? Land development banks are specifically established for giving funds to agriculture sector. But you said कि funds to agriculture sector are given by PACs. The difference is this is long-term finance. See, bank loan is normally, bank agriculture loan is normally 1, 2, 3, 4 years. उससे other banks don't give loan to agriculture sector. This is long-term agri-finance. Long-term agri-finance are given by State Cooperative Agri and Rural Development Boards, SCARDBs, and they are known as land development banks. See the name, land development, land को develop करने के लिए, specifically for land development, these banks are established. That is why they are called as land development banks. Do you understand? Yes or no? They are for long-term finance to agriculture sector. Okay, so far so good. Now coming to investment banks or merchant banks. See, what are investment banks? What are merchant banks? I told you. Do you know what is taper tantrums? Okay. Now there are a lot of investment opportunities available. You can invest in another country. You can invest in another company of another country. There are so many companies. People exchange. People trade in shares on stock exchange. There are so many assets available to invest. ठीक है? So investment banks का काम ही यही है. Investment banks, not merchant banks. Investment banks का काम ही यही है. The work of investment banks is to help their client to invest in good securities for better returns. And we are not talking about crores here. We are talking about hundreds and thousands of crores here. Right? So one person is having 10,000 crores to invest, or one company is having 10,000 crores to invest. Let's say Hindustan Unilever Limited, HUL, is a big company. Okay? Now that company is having surplus 10,000 crores remaining with it. So after selling off its products, 10,000 crores बच जाता है. So it will appoint an investment bank to manage ये 10,000 crores का investment. So that those banks give investment services. Have you heard of a qualification called CFA? CFA level 1, CFA level 2. They specialize in investment banking. So they learn which assets, when to invest, when not to invest, when to pull money out, when to push back money in. So these services are provided by investment banks. Any examples are of investment banks? Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley. These are all investment banks. Now bear in mind, let's take an example of HDFC. So HDFC will have one division as an investment bank also. HDFC Investment Banking Division. समझ में आ रहा है? So there is a group, HDFC group. HDFC Commercial Bank would be here, investment bank would be there. Sir, okay. What about merchant banks? Merchant banks manage the IPO of a company. Sir, what is IPO now? IPO is initial public offer. Whenever a new company is formed, whenever a new company wants to give away its shares to the public. Why would a new company give away its shares? See, shares means ownership stake. ठीक है? Shares मतलब जिसके पास share है वो owner है. Simple. One who has the share is the owner of the company. And how much owner, what percentage, जितना share उसके पास है. Remember in this investment we have done all this. So if I am holding 2 shares out of 10 shares, which means I am 20% owner of the company. If I am holding 2 shares out of 2 crore shares, which means I am 0.00002% owner of the company, right? So now what do you think? So let's say we 10-15 people, we come together and we form a company. We form a new business of designing an app. We design an app and we sell that app. We have a company. We need more money. Where will we go? Banks. Banks, we have taken a loan from banks. Still we need more money. Where will we go? Friends, family, we have taken money from them. We need more money. Where will we go? We see that our company, our app is very popular amongst Delhi and amongst ORN and amongst Karol Bagh people. What we do is we stand under a tree or we stand on top of a terrace building and we scream, whoever wants to invest in our company, whoever wants to become an owner in our company can give us 20 rupees for every share. Okay? Why will a person buy share of a company? Because if he knows कि I buy 20 rupees worth का share and if tomorrow the company makes profit, then I will gain because I am the owner of the company. So let's say if people believe in your idea, if people like what you are selling, if people like what you are doing with your app, they will come and they will buy shares of your company. So let's say you sold shares to 100 people today, 1 share per person, let's say. 100 shares you sold, which means there are 100 more owners of the company now. But what has happened? They have each given you 20 rupees. So 100 into 20, you have already got 2000 rupees with you. Samjha? So this is a way of raising money. And ये जो raise money करते हैं, all that money, all that new issue, it is called IPO, initial public offer, we'll do in markets chapter. So whenever this new issue of any company happens, this entire process is managed by merchant bank. समझा? So appointment of merchant bank is compulsory in case of a new issue, so that you don't take the money and run away without giving shares. ठीक है? So all the entire process of issue management, entire process of issuing shares and everything is undertaken by merchant bank. There are almost all commercial banks act as merchant banks. Almost. ठीक है? Kotak merchant bank है. So many are there. Where will Kotak Mahindra Bank come in this? It will come in two categories, na? It will come in domestic and it will come in private also. Very good. Now I want to change the nomenclature from refinance to something called as development banks. In this chapter, nobody will teach you the way I am teaching you when you do banking chapter. I will teach you bank's balance sheet, and that will help you understand NPA, non-performing asset problems and all of that. And questions come on NPA and everything. Even newspaper articles are filled with NPA problem. Okay? So we will do a completely new approach. We'll approach it in a very different manner. Okay? Chalo. Development banks. Development banks क्या होता है? They are, you can say, pseudo regulators. मतलब they are not as big as RBI or as big as SEBI, but they work as pseudo regulators. They are also called as refinance institutions. I will tell why they are called as refinance institutions. They are called as refinance institutions. Now why are they called as refinance institutions? Or who are they? कौन है ये लोग? You know, in that meme comes of Jolly LLB 2. कौन है ये लोग? कहाँ से आए हैं? Who are these people? ठीक है? By the way, if you want to know more about investment banks and merchant banks, or you know how a new startup is formed, or how money is raised by investors, how shares are given, you can see a series by TVF in 2015. It was released, called Pitchers. There is a series called Pitchers that will tell you how stake has to be diluted, how shares have to be given to someone new for raising money. See, you have an idea but you don't have money. Someone has money and he likes your idea, so he wants to become your partner. So you say ki come be owner of this idea, give me money. Whatever profit I will make, आधा तेरा आधा मेरा. That is the idea behind IPO. Okay? Now this happens on a scale of crores of people. Hence it is called as initial public offer. Right? Refinance institutions. So कौन है ये लोग? Who are they? Development banks. I will give you an example. Have you heard of NABARD? NABARD. National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development. Okay, NABARD is a bank. See, they are 100% controlled by the government. They are under the control of the government. They regulate specific sectors of the economy. They regulate finance to specific sectors of the economy. See, RBI covers entire banking. Everything is under RBI. Okay? So, if I give you an example of NABARD, it sees the banking facilities to agriculture sector and rural sector. It is called as NABARD. Okay, example, I'll write example here because this is important. It is called as NABARD, National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development. It works under RBI, they work under Government of India, they work under RBI, but they see specifically whether finance is reaching agriculturalists, whether finance is reaching rural areas, whether finance is actually being benefited or benefits are reaching these people. I told you in the last lesson, in inflation lesson, I told you something about National Housing Bank. Okay, same. National Housing Bank भी इधर ही आता है, National Housing Bank. Have you heard about Mudra Yojana, MUDRA? If not, then Mudra is, we'll speak about Mudra also in detail. Mudra is Micro Unit Development Refinance Agency. Have you heard of SIDBI? SIDBI? Small Industries Development Bank of India. SIDBI is also a part of. Small Industries Development Bank of India. So these are all pseudo regulators. These are just like RBI but on a smaller and on a specific scale. These are just like RBI for a specific sector. So SIDBI is for small industries. We speak about Mudra. Mudra is for micro units. NABARD is for agriculture and rural development, and NHB is for housing sector. These work under RBI. These work under the overall superintendence and supervision of RBI and Government of India. But they are in themselves. They are also regulators. Samjha? In themselves, they are regulators. So NABARD is a regulator. NABARD, NHB is a regulator. Mudra is a regulator. SIDBI is a regulator, and etc. So why are they called as development banks? Because they work towards development of that particular sector. They are 100% public. They are what we say, government controlled, and 100% public means they function under the government and under the overall instructions of RBI. Okay, now this NHB, this was under the this was a 100% subsidiary of RBI. Do you know subsidiary? We have done holding company and we have done subsidiary company. A company which works under a company, which means the bigger company has 100% shares of one company. Okay. So earlier, National Housing Bank was a 100% subsidiary of RBI, which means RBI held 100% of the shares of NHB, National Housing Bank. But now the control was shifted from RBI, or the shareholding was shifted from RBI to Government of India. So now NHB is operating directly under Government of India. Samjha? Earlier it was under RBI. Now see, RBI and government are different. I hope you know this. So now NHB is directly, NHB has been shifted, the control of NHB has been shifted from Government of India, from RBI to GOI with effect from 2019. 1st June, 1st April or June something 2019. Chalo, you are a farmer. Where will you get a loan? You can get a loan here. 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 Whoever is there in your area, you will get a loan. Okay? Who gives money to these institutions? RBI. They take money from, they take deposits also, and they take money from RBI also. In case of rural areas, in case of agriculture in rural areas, RBI says, I have my child NABARD. He will give you money. So if SBI is operating in a rural area and if SBI needs money in that area, it will approach NABARD. RBI को call करेगा, RBI बोलेगा, my kid, NABARD will give you. NABARD is a regulator. Hence, refinance institution. It does not, NABARD will never give you loan directly. It will give loan to SBI. SBI will give you loan directly. It is a refinance institution. It does not finance you. It refinances your financer. Who is your financer? Sir, my financer is SBI. Sir, my financer is HDFC. Sir, my financer is PAX. Sir, my financer is this. Sir, my financer is SCARDB. Okay? Who gives money to these? NABARD gives money to this. Hence, NABARD is a refinance institution, not a financing institution. Who is your financing institution? Your bank. It is giving you finance. Who is giving finance to your financier? A refinance institution. These all. These do not deal with people directly in normal circumstances. Remember, RBI also does not deal with people directly in normal circumstances. Yes or no? In what circumstances does RBI deal with people directly? Open market operations. Keyword है ये open market operations. OMO. It is called as OMO. So here also they don't deal with you directly unless some specific activities are there, which no need to know. But they refinance the commercial banks. So can I say refinance, or development banks refinance the commercial banks? Yes, they provide refinance, or they refinance the loans which are given by these banks. समझा इतना? Clear है? See, if this structure is made available at the beginning of the chapter, studying becomes so easy. because then you know ki which bank is having what problems, which bank is having what issues, what are the solutions. Now I would like to add, we have this pending, 6 we have pending. इसके लिए अलग से बोलेंगे non banks. I will add another layer now, new layer. These two banks, do you agree that these two are the major categories of banks? ये तो specialized banks हो गए, these are all specialized banks. ठीक है, these are the most consumer dealing or customer dealing banks. Majority of the customers deal with these. Yes or no? अच्छा, one very interesting question. What out of total agricultural credit in our economy, which means out of total finance provided to agriculturists or out of total finance provided to farmers, who do you think has the largest share? So if 100 rupees is provided to the farmers all over India, who do you think has the largest share in agricultural credit in India? Largest share किसका है? क्या लगता है आपको? What do you think? Who do you think has the largest share? Who is the biggest business person of agricultural credit? You might think it is there, but it is actually commercial banks. Commercial banks have the largest share of agricultural credit. They have branches everywhere. SBI has branch everywhere. SBI gives a lot of loan to farmers. So don't be under the impression कि they are meant for agriculture purpose तो उनका share ज़्यादा है, ऐसा नहीं है. See, their optional is agriculture, but doesn't mean they get high marks. Someone from other optional might also have a high knowledge in agriculture, right? Simple. Now another layer, we are adding another layer. These two banks can be further categorized. Sir, बस हो गया sir, क्या है ये? These two banks can be further categorized into scheduled or non-scheduled. Sir, क्या है ये? Nonsense. These can be further categorized into scheduled or non-scheduled banks. समझा? So there can be scheduled commercial banks, there can be scheduled cooperative banks, there can be non-scheduled cooperative banks or non-scheduled commercial banks. Easy. Almost all 99% of our banks are scheduled banks. Non-scheduled banks are very small. They are also called as local area banks. How many local area banks in India, sir? 2 or 3 local area banks in India. Local area matlab, let's say ORN, Old Rajendra Nagar, has its own bank. So ORN local area bank hoga. It will not be scheduled. It might be commercial or might be cooperative, but it will not be scheduled. So what do you mean by the term scheduled? Scheduled matlab kya? What is the meaning of the term scheduled? Scheduled means scheduled applicable to both commercial, cooperative. Scheduled means it is listed in second schedule of RBI Act 1934. So every act has a schedule. Schedule matlab kya? Ulta index, you can say. Index ka, like the index at the end. You know, there is glossary, there is bibliography at the end of every book. Every act has a list of schedules. Has 1 schedule, 2 schedules, depending on the size of the act. That schedule is nothing but lists. So I'll give you an example. Companies Act has a list of schedules for activities on which depreciation can be calculated. Just an example. Similarly, RBI Act has a list of banks. RBI Act has a list of banks who are recognized by RBI, who are registered under RBI and whom RBI gives help. So jitna functions that we saw, RBI is a lender of last resort, RBI is government banks, etc. This is all applicable to scheduled banks. Now scheduled both, scheduled commercial banks and scheduled cooperative banks. So whoever asks you what is the meaning of scheduled banks, the meaning is it is listed in the second schedule of Reserve Bank of India Act 1934. Is this clear? Now this is the background or this is the main overarching framework of our chapter. Abhi to we have not even discussed the content of the chapter, hai ki nahi? Are these banks regulated under RBI Act? Yes or no? No. I'll tell you why. These banks are not regulated under RBI Act. These are registered under RBI Act, which have RBI control. Regulation is done by one more act. We have seen that act. Do you remember? Regulation is done by which act? Regulation is done by See, in the name में ही है, नाम में ही है इसके. 19, if you remember, very good. 19, if you remember, means you have revised the lectures and seen the lectures with utmost attention. 1949. When did we see Banking Regulation Act? Where did we see it? Did we see it somewhere? कहीं तो देखा है. We have seen it somewhere. Where did we see it? We saw that in CRR or SLR. CRR or SLR. Remember, CRR में RBI Act था. SLR had Banking Regulation Act. ठीक है. So all the regulation pertaining to banking. See, RBI Act gives RBI powers over these banks. It is a source of power for RBI over these banks. Banking Regulation Act is the main, regulating act or the main act through which banks are regulated in India. तो control पूरा Banking Regulation Act में है, but the power to control is given to RBI under RBI Act 1934. समझा? Simple है अभी तक तो. Is it too complicated? I don't think it is very complicated for anyone. Right? Very good. Now we come to non-banks. Sir, ये non-banks क्या होता है? So I would like to again amend the name to a proper word. Non-banking financial company. NBFC. I think you have heard about them. NBFC, non-banking financial company. I'll tell you what are they. उसके पहले very important fact to know is that many of these banks are companies. They are companies. See, by company we normally what we think, someone who is producing something, that is a company. ऐसा नहीं है. In the eyes of law, in the eyes of commercial laws, company is a type of institution. So even LevelUp is a company. ठीक है. One, it might be a company, it might be a partnership firm, it might be a sole proprietorship. I am sole proprietorship. It might be a trust. You know, all universities are majorly universities and temples are set up as trust also. So there are different forms of organizations or different forms your organization can have. Many have some benefits and some disadvantages also. So depending on your business requirements, you have to register the form. So many of these companies, bear in mind, many of these companies are, many of these banks are companies in nature. They are registered under Companies Act and recognized under RBI Act and regulated under Banking Regulation Act. समझा? एक banking company को so many things apply together. Secondly, many of these cooperative banks are cooperative societies in nature. They are society in nature. They are not housing cooperative societies. ठीक है? So this is a very common this thing ki only housing cooperative societies exist. There are banking cooperative societies also. Banking cooperative societies means they come together as a group, they pitch in money, and whoever needs money can borrow the money and pay interest. So that is a cooperative society. So many of these are in cooperative society form. Many of these are in banks form. These are also in banks form. These are also in company form. Sorry, company form, society form. उसका form अलग अलग है. The structure is different. Right? We speak about NBFC now. नाम में क्या है? Just tell me what is the meaning of. It is a financial company, but it is non-bank, which means it is not a scheduled bank. Yes or no? It is not listed as a banking company. Yes or no? But it is a financial company. Now, what do you mean by financial company? Financial company means you take deposits, you give loans, you earn interest, you give interest. It is a financial company. But it is not a bank. So there are some companies, you might have heard Bajaj Finance Limited. Okay? It is a non-banking finance company. So they are there in a specific line of business. They are not banks. They don't cater to banking services jaisa. They are there in a specific line of business and they are registered with RBI. Some are registered with RBI. This is the funny part. Some are registered with RBI. Some are registered with SEBI. Okay? Depending on the nature. If that NBFC is operating in markets, capital markets, and money markets, capital markets, then it will be under SEBI. If it is operating under normal finance system, then it will be under RBI. Now let us go to RBI website and I will show you something very interesting. RBI website तो पूरा देख ही लिया है हमने, है ना, क्या ही होगा उसमें. NBFCs, are we studying NBFCs? Yes. What is an NBFC? क्या होता है NBFC? A non-banking financial company is a company registered under Companies Act 1956 or Companies Act 2013. This act was repealed and this act was changed to 2013. Engaged in the business of loans and advances. Yes. Acquisition of shares, stocks, bonds, debentures issued by government, that every bank does. Remember, lending it to the government. Issued by government or local authority or other marketable securities of a like nature. Leasing, hire purchase, insurance, cheat business, any nature where money is involved and you are not a bank, it's called as a non-banking financial company. Okay? But does not include any institution whose principal business is agriculture or industry or purchase or sale of any goods, which means normal manufacturing companies are not NBFCs, because NBFCs ka main goods is money. Right? See, bear in mind, Tata makes cars. Tata might also invest in shares. Tata might also invest money somewhere. Tata is a company. But is the main business money? No. It is side business, side mein, earning. Okay? So they are excluding all of those whose main business is not money. Okay? A non-banking institution is a company and has principal business of receiving deposits under any scheme, etc. Okay? Ye ho gaya. Now I want. This is very important, most important part. Read this. What is the difference between banks and NBFCs? NBFCs cannot accept demand deposits. Matlab, what is demand deposits? Have we seen demand deposits somewhere? Have we seen demand liabilities somewhere? What is demand deposits? What is demand deposits? Deposits that you can withdraw on demand, current account, savings account. Okay, in banking terms it is called as CASA. In banking terms it is called as CASA, current account, savings account. NBFCs cannot open your current account, savings account, which means they can only open time deposits. Am I right? What are time deposits? FD, RD, etc. Second, NBFCs do not form part of payment and settlement system, which means NEFT, RTGS, payment and settlement system, clearing system, usme they cannot take part, which means they cannot issue checks. Yes or no? They cannot issue checkbooks. Samjha? These are key differences. I will give you time to write this down. These three things you have to write it down. Directly we are studying from RBI website. Khatam. Deposit insurance facility of DICGC is not available. Sir, what is this? So in India, if a bank fails, bank agar डूब जाता है, if a bank fails, and we have seen recent cases where banks have been failing. Yes Bank has failed, or Yes Bank is in deep trouble. Then now PMC Bank is in deep trouble. There are many banks which are going bankrupt, which are not able to repay your money back. So your life savings are in the bank. You have earned so much and you have saved in a bank. Yes or no? And tomorrow if that bank fails, which means it is unable to repay your money back, it is very bad, right? So in India, we have something called as a deposit insurance system. Deposit insurance for deposits. Now, you might be keeping crores of rupees in your bank, but insurance covers only money up to 5 lakh rupees in India. Always remember this. It covers money only up to 5 lakh rupees. It was 2 lakh rupees earlier. It was increased to 5 lakh rupees. So even if you are keeping 10 lakh, to be 5 lakh milega. If you are keeping 10 crores, to be 5 lakh milega. Now this 5 lakh is guaranteed by the government. Tomorrow if the bank resolves itself and bank again comes up, then it will repay your money back. But until and unless that happens, your 5 lakh is secure. Now if you have 2 lakh only, then obviously you will get 2 lakh only. Now extra nahi milta hai isme. Okay? deposit insurance facility is not available to depositors of NBFCs, unlike in banks. Banks may deposit insurance is available, NBFC may deposit insurance is not available. Do you understand this? So I will give you time to write, but let us move ahead now. Is it necessary that every NBFC should be registered with RBI? What do you think? Yes, registration is. In terms of this, no NBFC can commence any business without obtaining a certificate of registration from RBI. No need to know all this. Then, what are the main reason why I removed see this. Does RBI regulate all financial companies? No, not all. Registration? Yes. Regulation? No. See, housing finance companies are regulated by NHB. Remember NHB, National Housing Bank? Merchant banks, oh, we have seen all this. सब कुछ तो पढ़ा है यार, क्या बाकी है अभी? See, this is the core of it. What are the different categories of NBFCs registered with RBI? So there are different categories depending on the different purpose, depending on the different क्या बोलते हैं उसको? Nature of business. So one is investment company. You just have to know the names. Investment company means it does only investment. One is loan company. One is infrastructure finance company. It finances only infrastructure. उसका business ही वो है. ठीक है? See a high level. Systematically important core investment company. छोड़ दो इसको. Okay. Infrastructure debt fund. See, these are just types I am showing you. Microfinance. What do you think is the meaning of the word microfinance institution? It gives small loans, microfinance. So those companies which are not banks but registered with RBI as financial companies but NBFCs but giving only small loans, they will be classified as NBFC MFI. उसको नाम ही दिया जाएगा NBFC MFI. See, I'll just see the example. NBFC is a non-deposit taking NBFC. It cannot accept deposits having not less than 85% of its assets. What are the assets of a bank? Deposits or loans? Loans are assets, yes or no? They create faida. So having more than, not less than means more than 85% of its loans in the nature of qualifying assets which satisfy the following criteria. Chote rural household, not exceeding 1 lakh rupees, aisa sab. No need to go in depth. Do you agree or do you appreciate the different types of NBFCs? We don't need to remember all of them, but just that NBFCs are categorically different from banks. They are like banks but not banks. है ना? Now one thing you need to write, those 3 points you need to write, and one more thing you need to write is this. What are systematically important NBFCs? Sir, systematically important क्या होता है? Whose loan size, asset size is 500 crores or more are systematically important NBFCs. मतलब क्या? If they fail, then there is a big risk to the economy. They are systematically important. They are important for the functioning of the economy. Yes or no? They are big, na? They are big. They are important for the functioning of the economy. Hence, they are called as systematically important NBFCs. There are systematically important banks also. Domestic systematically important banks. जिसका loan size is more than 2% of India's GDP, which means it's a big bank. It becomes systematically important because if it fails, see that GDP 2% से नीचे हो जाएगा. That is also systematically important banks. But here we are talking about, I'll talk about banks in detail. Here we are talking about systematically important NBFCs. इतना समझा? Do you understand this? So please jot these points down because ये तो we are doing it from live website. Live सीधा. अरे ये नहीं, कहाँ गया वो? This. Write these 3 lines. Now again use your common sense and don't copy whole sentences. Write in your own words. Write the meaning of demand deposits if you want. Write the meaning कि क्या है, what is the exact meaning of demand deposits. We know demand deposits मतलब क्या? Current account, savings account are demand deposits. The proper definition of demand deposits is deposits repayable on demand. Whenever you demand, bank has to repay them. So 1, NBFCs cannot accept demand deposits. Second, they do not form part of payment and settlement system, and very important, they cannot issue checks drawn on itself. वो पूरा लिख दो चाहिए तो, that entire sentence is very important, write in sentence form. Do not form part of settlement system, payment system, do not issue or cannot issue checks drawn on itself. And third, deposit insurance facility of DICGC is not available to depositors of NBFCs, unlike in case of banks. ठीक है? Write that also. Systematically important NBFCs are those which have a asset size of 500 crores or more. बस इधर तक ही लिखो. 500 crores or more. That's it. इसके आगे का no need to write. See this, pay attention here. The rationale for such classification is that activities of such NBFCs will have a bearing on the financial stability of the overall economy. They are big, na? So if they fail, problem hoga. That is why this is the rationale. NBFCs whose asset size is 500 crores or more are called as systematically important NBFCs. Bas, that's it. ये पूरा last audited balance sheet ये सब लिखने की जरूरत नहीं है. There is no need to write these things. But do you realize the fact that we are reading RBI website and understanding lot many things? है ना, direct है. पढ़ने का तो ओरिजिनल सोर्स. Okay? See, I'll just show you something. Frequently asked questions होता है, FAQs होता है. Let us understand whether we know anything or not. Do we know what is NBFCs? Do we know what is HFCs? Housing finance companies. Do we know what is UCBs? Urban cooperative banks. Cooperative bank urban. Do we know what is RRBs? Regional rural banks. Do we know what is commercial bank? Yes. But commercial banks excluding RRBs likha hai, because I told you RRBs are normally not included in RBI's activities, because RBI tells you do your work there, don't look at anywhere else. So it falls under commercial banks, but lot of facilities available to commercial banks are not available to RRB. Do you know target long term repo operations? Yes. Pension तो ठीक है. ये COVID related stress assets we are going to cover in banking chapter, so ये भी आएगा आपको. Do you know RBI is banker to government? Do you know CRR exemption? What is CRR and all? ठीक है. Priority sector lending. Do we know priority sector lending? PSL. ठीक है. Do we know MCLR? ठीक है. So many things you might not know. Many things are not even important. Like for example, banking ombudsman scheme, not important. क्या है, क्यों है, not important. ठीक है. So many things we are on track to achieve a lot of knowledge. We are understanding a lot of things. The only thing is that when you read MCLR in paper, you should know what is MCLR. ठीक है. You should know कि it is the regime change after base rate it came, and what is the main concept of MCLR? कि from average cost it moved on to marginal cost. बस simple, one line, done. ठीक है. Let us see this. Commercial banks are of so many types. Differentiated banks, we are yet to speak about them. They can be either scheduled, they can be non-scheduled. Cooperative banks can be either scheduled, non-scheduled. Scheduled means kya? They are listed in the second schedule of RBI Act and regulated by Banking Regulation Act 1949. Urban UCBs, urban cooperative banks, rural में state, district, primary agricultural credit society. These gives funds to agriculture sector. Then land development banks, these give long-term credits to agriculture sector. There has been a recommendation by RBI working group to merge these. Merge कर दो. क्यों इतना अलग-अलग infrastructure? Merge these. ठीक है? Who are investment banks and merchant bankers? Investment banks give special services of investment banking. They give literally banking services for investments. And merchant bankers are issue bankers. they help with issue management, new issue, IPO, shares transfers and all. They do all of that. Okay, what are development banks? They are banks by government only, but they refinance these banks. Yes or no? They are refinance institutions. For example, NABARD, NHB, Mudra, SIDBI, right? NHB, you need to know that it was a 100% subsidiary of RBI earlier, but from RBI it went to Government of India with effect from 2019. Okay? When we speak about Housing Finance Company, HFC, we have seen Housing Finance Company in RBI, this thing. Housing Finance Company is a type of NBFC. Okay? This is National Housing Bank. Housing Finance Company is a type of NBFC registered with National Housing Bank. समझा क्या बोला? So I would add one more thing here. National Housing Bank. ठीक है? Right? Controlled by RBI, SEBI and NHB depending on the area in which they operate. Very simple, very straightforward, no problemo. Where will Bank of Baroda fall? Public, domestic, commercial bank. It's not a cooperative bank. Okay? Can one bank fall under different categories? Yes. It can also give merchant banking services. Okay? Remember, regional rural banks hai, but they are given step motherly or step fatherly treatment. That is, I told you in LAF also, they don't get access to LAF funds. Okay? But in COVID times, they were given access to LAF funds. Special case because they also need to boost rural liquidity. Yes or no? Right? So we have begun with banking chapter. Tomorrow we'll start with something very important, banks balance sheet, and we'll know the NPA problem in detail. In the next lecture, we'll know the NPA problem in detail, what all banks can do to reduce NPAs, what all banks have to do to reduce NPAs, why NPA is a big problem and why many questions come on NPAs, and why one of the critical issues facing the Indian economy is rising NPAs. NPAs are non-performing assets. Now, what do you think is asset of a bank? Loans or deposits? Loans. So what do you mean by non-performing assets? What do you think about non-performing assets? What do you think the term indicates? Non-performing assets, which means that you have given a loan. It is an asset, but it is not performing, which means income is not coming, interest is not coming, that borrower is not paying me back. Yes or no? So for banks, is it good thing or a bad thing? Very bad thing, because ek to loanable funds are very less. RBI is taking CRR, government is saying keep SLR. We'll see in this chapter, so many funds have to be kept aside, more funds we'll see which are to be kept aside. So he is not giving. So the entire, just see, if Tata Motors fails, it does not have any relation or very less relation with Hyundai Motors or Maruti Suzuki. If one bank fails, many banks fail. Why? We saw na? All banks are interrelated. They are the financial, they are money of the economy. Okay, they run through the veins of the economy. So if one bank fails, entire chain fails and your entire economy fails. Yes or no? That is why we classify some of them as systematically important banks. कि उसको तो fail होना ही नहीं चाहिए. कि if that fails, then your economy is doomed. समझा? ठीक है? So we'll stop here. I want to go slowly because these are very new concepts for you, you know. So maybe you can pause here and you can take a screenshot. I don't think you will be drawing this. So you pause here, take a screenshot if you want. Then next, this is very important. You pause here and write this down. This will help you to understand the structure of banking in our economy. Right? Next, we go here. This is also important. And the 3 points which you wrote, वो इसके सामने ही लिख देना. NBFCs, so draw this and write those 3 points. What were those 3 points? NBFCs, what was the first point? What was the first point? They cannot accept demand deposits. Second point, they do not form part of payment and settlement system and they cannot issue checks drawn on itself. Third, deposit insurance facility is not available for depositors of NBFC but available for banks. Right? We'll stop here. Very crucial lectures coming up. Next 2 lectures are going to be very important. And I think in the next 2 lectures, we'll finish off banking chapter. Okay, next 2 lectures. But I don't think it will take. Then we move on to balance of payments, WTO. Many important chapters are remaining, right? So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you understood this. Inflation chapter is completely over. Banking chapter is going on. Banking chapter has started. We spoke about banking chapter. We'll speak a lot about new terms also. I hope so. Just revise monetary policy once before looking at further lectures of banking chapter, because they are intricately related. Other chapters, it's okay, tax, GDP are not that related, but banking chapter is monetary policy is absolutely related to banking chapter. Okay? I did inflation in between because monetary policy controls inflation, so inflation kar lete, and then we go to banking. So we are in banking chapter. Thank you so much. Keep revising. I'll see you in the next lecture.